Hi and welcome back to Family Sociology, and here we are in week 13, our last chapter, and we're going to look at the family beleaguered when problems come. No family escapes problems, yet they respond in many different ways. Some overcome the hurdles and move to new heights, and others get beaten down. What we're going to look at is how these two families deal with these problems when they arrive. In this chapter, we're going to look at what the definition of problems within a family, context that is. Sociologists have looked at the dynamics of how family problems introduced into the family, and how does the family deal with these issues when they do, what are the results, and when they don't deal with the problems very well, why is that the case? We're also going to look at how does the ABCX model help us describe the response in the family system to problems. Now, the ABCX model is one that's in your textbook, and I'm going to briefly walk you through essentially how the model looks at family problems. And we'll also touch on what are some of the 7 strengths model of resilience to support families and what they can do to help themselves. Now, the family problems I'm going to focus on are chronic illnesses, or a chronic illness in the family, and alcoholism. And lastly, what role does communication play in problem solving? And that's where we're going to cover in this particular chapter. So, all right, so let again remind you that using your sociological imagination is really important, in that we're all had different experiences with family issues and family problems, and some of which we won't be covering here. We don't have, everyone's experiences is not exactly the same. So bear this in mind, that this is big data perspective. It's as if we are standing on a very tall tower looking down at a lot of examples. Your example will be in among them, but so will everybody else's. So let's get started, and good luck. The first thing we need to do is determine who determines what is a family problem. Does the family define, I have a problem, therefore it is a big problem, or do we have people who are involved in the process and the public decides what the problem is? Is that the way it goes? Now, this subject is changing over time. Like, what a problem is today wasn't a problem, say, 15, 20 years ago, and then not certainly 100 years ago. So this is a subject that changes over time. The impact of lone motherhood, for example, was gone from unacceptable to it's not an issue in the issues today. So it's not much. So again, the public defined when it was an issue and when it wasn't. The main groups that make up the public often have competing interests, with the most powerful groups having what they call vested interests, since they have a stake in keeping society either the way it is or a stake in having it be something different. Now, what is a family problem changes over time? Of course it does. So what was once accepted as normal can today be seen as a family problem. For example, homosexuality was at one point seen as a family problem, but now can be viewed as normal. I mentioned 2 groups. There was the powerful group of having vested interests. The vested interests of the rich and the powerful may not agree how their tax dollars are going to people. The rich may think those people should be pulling up their own socks rather than seeing the long-term costs of supporting people continually being disadvantaged and needing support via longer healthcare with longer healthcare costs and housing supports. So they have a vested interest, and you could say that this includes all taxpayers have a vested interest, that their tax dollars are being spent appropriately for people who have legitimate issues. So in order to gauge who does and who doesn't, and who's entitled and who's not, there are what we are called gatekeepers. So gatekeepers, you can put in quotes, and that's what I've been doing. It's not like there's an actual person or people standing at a gate letting people in and turning others away. However, there are individuals recognized as having special expertise in identifying some special or specific problems, and who controls the access point to important people or important services. That's what gatekeepers do. In Canadian society, gatekeepers would include doctors, police officers, judges, social workers, and other such support roles. The gatekeepers are basing their diagnosis or their conditions based on law breaking or based on some other criteria that you don't qualify or you do qualify, and they're making that judgment. Doctors decide whether or not you need a hospital stay or medications. We don't decide that for ourselves. Not everyone in society defines problems in the same way. Some special interest groups or of two different groups, two groups are similar, but may not work together to change or to force change so that a special interest group can sort of lobby to bring their issues forward. So what I hope you're seeing behind me now is the ABCX model, and it looks fairly straightforward, and it's if you look at the ABCX model and explain how families respond to stressors based on the resources they have. So it's stressors, and do we have resources? If we do, then we can work out our problems. But if we have stressors but not very many resources, that might be an issue. It's also considered how they perceive that stressor. So the stressor, the resources, and the perception of the stressor, how they feel about it. Now, this model came out of Reuben Hill's work in about 1958, and he proposed what he called the ABCX model, where A is the response to the new problem, where A refers to the stressing event or the stressor event. B, it refers to the impact of the stressor on the family, on the family resources. So whatever resources we have available to combat or to fight off the stressor. That's the A, and then the B. And then the C refers to the way the family members view the stresses of the stressing event. Remember, in sociology, part of what's important is to remember the symbolic interactionalist perspective. They're the ones with the face-to-face interpreting meaning of what things mean in our family. They look at how does the family or the individuals interpret the stressor. Therefore, they define what's the problem and how big of a problem is it to us. So they are able to, they can either determine, yes, we can cope with this, or we can maybe figure we can't cope with this very well. Not everyone views the same problem in the same way. So the C, that's how the families view the stressing event, and then the X represents the crisis. So the X is the crisis. So the A is the stressor, the B is the resources that the family has, the C is how does the family view the stressor, and then X is the crisis. So what you see in this model is, it's in your textbook, and it's using an example of the breadwinner loses a job, and they go on to the crisis. Now, the family needing resources, they may have some savings or developing some new employability skills. They may have an employment insurance to add additional family support. They see themselves maybe as a victim, or they may see it as an opportunity. They may even attempt to lay some blame. Then the crisis would be the result of this experience. So the solutions may be functional. You may come up with a good solution and handle this in a positive way where the crisis is mitigated. Or it may be dysfunctional, where you might not have very many resources and not see this to be you not perceive the stressor in a very positive way. There may be many temporarily reduced family tensions that create a new problem in the future, and that can be further dysfunctional. Families, unfortunately, don't often have one problem or one crisis at a time. Often there can be multiple or connected crises. And here we need to look at the double ABCX model. Now basically, what's happening here is that the family crisis evolves over time and pressures from various sources accumulate so that the double ABCX model points to 5 stressors. The first one, there's an initial stressor and it's the hardship. That's the A, and then there's the normative stressor in the family. Now, what are considered to be usual kinds of things and strains in the family? Your children grow up to be teens. Teens can be somewhat of a strain in a family in terms of adjustments. The sandwich generation, these are normative stressors. 3 strains that began before the particular stressor. That could be low income, low skill level. And then there's the 4, the effect of the family's coping. Do they accept that there's a problem or not? And then there's 5, that's ambiguity of the situation. Within the family or within society may not be very clear, like how long will the breadwinner be out of work? Well, I don't know. It's ambiguous. And so we're having that typical ABCX as a pre-crisis, and then the post-crisis would be the piling of additional demands. The AA in conjunction with any adaptation resources, the BB that may be available to families. And again, their perception of this experience, and as this continues to pile up over time, either there's a family that now is adapting, that's the XX, but there's 2 types of adaptations. Bonadaption, which is the positive adaptation, and maladaption. That's the negative, or denying the existence of any problem. It's kind of like being thrown over a cliff and you're saying, so far so good, no biggie. Now, to consider how to help a family better, social workers, psychologists, and other gatekeepers have tried to focus on resilience. Recently, researchers have focused on the family's ability to do well in the face of adversity. Resilience doesn't mean the best of a bad situation. It involves change, sometimes drastic change, to produce a stronger and healthier adaptation. The 7 resiliencies identified a framework of talking about these strengths. The first is insight. So one of the elements of resilience is the sight asking tough questions. Insight about asking tough questions and giving honest answers. And this falls back to what would be mentioned in previous videos around the importance of communication. That it has to be, it has to be that you are able to ask the tough questions and be able to answer honestly to those tough questions in order to have a realistic response and a realistic ability to see what the problem is. So that's an important first step. 2, independence. Independence is distancing oneself emotionally and physically from the source of the trouble in one's life. Now, when I've mentioned about standing on a tower and looking over society from a high spot, you don't see all the little details, but you see the bigger pieces and how they are interacting. Independence is more about distancing yourself and not looking too closely at the discomfort and the pain, but to look back from it and see it from a bigger picture view. if you will. They distance yourself from the emotional and the physical of the source and see the information as it comes. 3, relationships. Making fulfilling connections with other people. It's one of the hallmarks of success for longevity and life and happiness is friendship and connections that you have with other people. 4, initiative. Taking charge of the problem, acknowledging it, if you will. At first, the problem is yours, and then asking and taking responsibility for it and taking charge of the problem, it's a critical part of resilience. If I go around thinking that all these problems that are mine are actually somebody else's, I won't feel like I can control them because, well, somebody else controls them. I won't be able to change my life. If I can't own my troubles and take charge of my problems, then I have a better chance of making a change in them. And then 5 is our creativity. Creativity is using our imagination and expressing oneself, and is somewhat of an art form. You could use creativity both in the way of calming ourselves over time, but it also contributes to problem solving. 6, in a more creative way, humor is finding the comic or the humor in a particular tragedy. So part of what is resilience is knowing how you can laugh at yourself and be able to at least sort of de-stress based on the use of humor. And then 7 is morality. Acting on the basis of our consciousness rather than any self-interest and any practical condition. So resilience is important to families' ability to deal with stress as it will arise in a family over time. Now, some specific family problems that we'll look at, as I mentioned, about chronic illness and around alcoholism. So let's first look at chronic illness. Illness itself is a continuing stress. So in a family, dealing with chronic illness is ongoing and continuous. So that's where the ABCX or the double ABCX model might play a significant role, especially if there's an unpredicted episode or if it's progressive and the prognosis is uncertain. In 2006, 14.3% of Canadians had some sort of disability. Developmental delays are the most common among young children. Mobility and memory problems are more common among the older adults. Chronic illness or disability usually starts in one of 2 ways, suddenly or over a period of time. As an illness becomes chronic, stressors on the family pile up and begin, and again, this is where you could be using the double ABCX model. Remember, the piling up is ABCX. And that's the double ABCX, the piling up. And to sort out the evaluative work and to look at what are the conditions in this family to deal with. So there's a beginning piece in this, and it's the lead up to the crisis. So whether it's sudden event or it's more gradual onset, the family starts to recognize that something is going wrong. Now, once there is a formal diagnosis, perhaps that's Alzheimer's or cancer, that's the illness, and acknowledging the chronic condition to begin with, the stressors on the family can get ratcheted up from the earlier suspicions. Now, this is representing the A factor of the ABCX. Next, the family looks at activating their existing resources. That's the B factor. This, coupled with any other strains, whether they have other dependents or are caregiving, will add to the stressors. Now, all this is filtered through the family's own view, the perception of how things going. There's the C factor. And then what is the family script for a crisis? Is it helpful or is it detrimental? Do we feel we can manage this crisis, or do we have someone we want to blame? All of this time, the family may be struggling to complete day-to-day activities, preparing meals, doing laundry. Burnout might be experienced, breaking down the family resources and put us into the X factor, which is the crisis. And then we move to the after crisis period. As the illness becomes chronic, demands of the family pile up. So we get to the AA factor, that's that pile up. Within the family members, they may approach burnout and no longer be able to handle everyday hassles. Relationships with other family members can become strained. In order to deal with this, the families begin to adapt to their resources, and this is the BB factor. Added to the stress of the normative family changes, you remember that's just the regular family life cycle kind of issues. These include things like going through puberty or growing independence of young people or finding a mate or having children or even retiring. So over time, the family may need to change their perception of the illness. And there's the C factor, or the CC factor for the double ABCX. So as you can imagine, coping and adaptation to this can be very dynamic. There may be dysfunctional coping, and this is overprotecting the ill. Or it could be overprotecting the disabled member of the family, or denying of the reality of the illness. It could be involving anger and resentment toward the ill person. Or you can have a functional coping, helping family feel in control of trying to understand the medical situation through communication with others like themselves and the medical personnel, emphasizing family cooperation and accessing social support. Next, we'll just quickly again, we're going to look at the alcohol family system, where the acceptance of the alcohol use varies among cultures. The economic impact of alcohol-related harm in Canada is estimated to be around $14.6 billion per year. It involves personal and social costs of the illness and inability to fulfill family and work responsibilities. Premature death, fetal alcohol syndrome can have a lot of effect on the family, both short-term and long-term. Alcohol and substance abuse is defined by society, and in 2009, 76.5% of Canadians report drinking in the last 12 months. Now, that doesn't indicate how much people drank. It just indicates that a large number of Canadians enjoy drinking. Now that in and of itself isn't the problem. Drinking in and of itself isn't the problem. It's the frequency of that can be the problem, or the circumstances that can be the problem. Are you drinking to be among friends and social, or are you drinking to deal with problems that exist in your life? The entire family is involved, not just the individual involved when there's one alcoholic member. Now we're going to revisit this double ABCX model and apply it to the alcohol abuse. In this example of alcoholism has a number of factors similar to chronic illness, as well as some differences in alcoholic families. Enablers. Enablers allow the individual to continue to drink without suffering some sort of extreme consequence. Family members may be also codependents, where they lack personal boundaries to take on the drinker's problems. They find meaning and worth in caretaking the problem drinker. They may also believe that he or she is responsible for whatever happens to the drinker. And lastly, the codependent, there may be risks of developing a stress-related illness. Alcoholism can have a profound effect on the marriage relationship. Communication may be affected. Alcoholics have a reduced ability to read a number of facial cues and facial cues and emotions. Irritability during drinking bouts can be an alternate with excessive kindness during sober spells. Anger can escalate to violence. So when you look at this particular model, remember that the double ABCX model, what you're seeing is the particular example from the crisis in which a car accident, but the alcoholism is already been done in the first ABCX. So if we carry on the specific family problems, alcohol family members of an alcoholic family can learn a number of lessons about family life. First, that alcohol is the center of the family life, and that alcohol can make things better. Secondly, the family learns that alcohol abuse is a family secret to be covered up. This pattern of coping has its costs for the non-alcoholic family members. There's anxiety, depression, shame, anger. Children of alcoholic parents are more likely to display behavior problems themselves. Often, alcoholism is not admitted until there's a decisive event that makes denial impossible. A car accident, a loss of job, or a partner as a result, or loss of job or loss of a partner as a result of alcohol abuse. When an alcoholic member stops drinking, however, there may be a crisis of sobriety. The family still has the old patterns and have to learn new patterns. There are many solutions, but the bottom line often comes down to communication and problem solving. As families encounter problems, they must find solutions if they are going to cope. Families who talk openly and their feelings and adapt to problems and provide valuable emotional and practical support to one another adapt relatively well to chronic illness and disabilities. Families with more effective problem-solving skills usually communicate more clearly. Now, we've talked about this periodically throughout the course about the importance of communication, and it's paramount to success in any relationship. I hope if you take anything away from family sociology, it's the importance of open and honest communication with your partner and your children moving towards a successful and happy family life. It enriches not only, but predominantly by open and honest communication. So good luck with your next semester. I hope you enjoy your break in the summer, if you have a break. If you're back to school in the summer session, good luck to you. It's been a pleasure teaching and offering you an online experience, and thank you so much for your journal and your assignments. They've been great, and they've been informative and very thoughtful. And in many cases, I've really enjoyed this particular course, and I really just want to say to everybody, good luck to you all and your future endeavors. So, bye now.